Hello, readers. Welcome to today's book. It's called The Story of Rosy Dock by Jeannie Baker. Jeannie Baker is an Australian author and illustrator who has made some most beautiful and amazing books and has used collage as her style of illustration in a lot of those books. They are actually on display in art galleries, the actual artworks from her books. That's how amazing they are. The book is about a plant called Rosy Dock, and that kind of seems a bit funny that a book would be about a plant, but it's a narrative and it's about introducing new plants or animals into another country. So in Australia, Rosy Dock doesn't grow naturally, but people who came to live here brought different plants and animals, and sometimes it had terrible consequences for our natural plants and animals. Sometimes they could be even come extinct as a result of an introduced species coming in. So introduced species comes from another place, and native species means it lives here. So let's read the story of Rosy Dock and find out what happened, and I'll talk to you after the book.
The Story of Rosy Dock by Jeannie Baker. This is the end papers of the book, and it shows us the main character and her house where she lives. People say it's the oldest river in the world. The Finke River begins in the centre of Australia, surrounded by desert and the worn down bones of prehistoric mountains. For thousands of years, almost nothing here has changed. Then, over 100 years ago, newcomers from Europe settled by the river. With them they brought their animals, horses and camels, cats, foxes and rabbits. Some years later, another settler arrived. She brought seeds from the other side of the world and planted a garden. One plant she especially loved for its beautiful red seed pods. The land here is hot and dry. Water is precious. And you can see that she's not the only one who needs to use that water. The local indigenous people also use that water. Here is her home where she is planting her garden. And they probably were planting based on what they knew would grow and what they loved from their homeland rather than what the new environment was like. The wind blows strongly at times, and great spiralling willy-willies storm across the desert, whipping up things in their paths. Hardly any rain falls for years on end. But hidden in the mountains are ancient oases. Desert creatures find water here, even in the driest of times. So an oasis is an area of land within a desert that has more water available and more green plant life, and animals gather there. The river is mostly a river of sand. One day, it was unnaturally dark, and there was an uneasy silence. Suddenly, the sky cracked open. Rain poured in torrents from the clouds, and soon the river was roaring with water. Rain kept pounding down, and the river became a raging flood. The flooded river swept on, swirling, spiraling, surging on and on, to a great sand dune desert where it spread wide like a sea. There are the animals gathering on the small patch of dry land that are available to them. The water crept slowly across the desert until eventually it disappeared into the sand. And then the desert suddenly blossomed. Birds and animals appeared. The air came alive with insects and perfumed flowers grew everywhere. Those birds are cockatoos, which we can hear a lot in the Australian landscape. The harsh, searing sun soon evaporated the water. Wind sucked away the last traces of moisture, leaving only mirage and a sea of rolling sand. The pattern continues, with many more cycles of rain and drought. Dust storms scatter seeds and bury them in the desert sands. And now, when the rains have watered the desert, Rosy Dock, the plant with beautiful red seed pods, is spreading like a great red blanket further than the eye can see. In that last picture, we saw some rabbits, which are an introduced species that have done a lot of damage in Australia. Rosy Dock is not native to Australia. It was introduced from North Africa or West Asia. Since then, seeds have blown their way across South, Central and Western Australia, where Rosy Dock continues to spread. Throughout the world, often with the best of intentions, people introduce plants and animals into a new environment with enormous unforeseen circumstances or consequences. That means they didn't know what would happen. Without their normal predators, some non-native plants and animals multiply so quickly they change whole landscapes and push many native plants and animals to extinction. We can see that because of the floods, some of her furniture is still stuck up in the trees, and you can see the Rosy Dock spreading.
Jeannie Baker has used some really beautiful language in this story, and she's used some particular writing techniques to really bring her story to life. So, one of the examples that she has used is an image. She's used imagery. So, she's described the increasing growing fields of Rosy Dock as spreading like a great red blanket. So that gives us an image in our mind of what it would look like. But also, it makes us think, she's compared it to a great red blanket. Red because it's the colour of Rosy Dock. But I'm imagining you're in the desert and it's really hot and oppressive. The last thing you would want on you is a big blanket. And that kind of gives us the idea that the Rosy Dock might have actually been suffocating or stifling the growth of the native plants because the Rosy Dock was taking the moisture and resources. So you imagine a big red blanket being put over the native plants so they can't thrive and be happy in that environment. So that was the use of imagery, which is really beautiful. Another literary or writing technique that she's used to draw some focus onto something or to make the writing more interesting is alliteration. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from the book again where she's used a lot of sounds in the words. Okay, so let's listen. I'll put the words up on the screen. Harsh, searing sun soon evaporated. Winds sucked away the last traces of moisture, leaving only mirage and a sea of rolling sand. Did you hear all those sounds? So what it does is it really brings that image to life for us visually, but also in our ears. We can hear those sounds, and it kind of is a little bit like the sounds that come down when it's raining. She's really very clever. So that was the story of Rosy Dock. And actually, we learnt a lot. We learnt about introduced species and native species. We learnt about the drought in the desert and also the flooding rains. Those two cycles are a big part of life in Australia, droughts and floods. And also we learnt a little bit about the plant Rosy Dock, and we learnt about the importance of not taking things into different environments where they don't belong. And we learnt two literary techniques that Jeannie Baker used, imagery and alliteration. And maybe you can use those in your writing. I'll see you next time for our next amazing story. Bye!